The next step in this build process is to add the 15 ports on the back of the case. At this point you should already have the case with the holes drilled in it and the numbers applied to the back of the case. For this part we will need 15 of the jack extensions, some 3/32 heat shrink tubing, some 1/4" heat shrink tubing, 15 jack ports with the retainer nut, some wire strippers, and a solder iron and some soldering. To get started with this, we're going to want to do a little bit of prep work. Let's start by getting our heat shrink. This is the 3/32 and the 1/4", and we're going to want to cut these pieces into about a 1/4" roughly. What this will do is when we're finished soldering on the individual post, it will cover up the electrical parts to protect them from touching each other. Alright. This doesn't have to be exact, but they don't need to be too long either. They're really pretty short posts. I found a 1/4" seems to work really nicely. Let's do a few of each of these. I generally just cut up enough to work with the ones I'm like one row at a time, or in this case I'm just doing one stick of heat shrink. Alright, and I'll put these over on the side for later use. Okay, next let's get the extension cable and the power jack, or the Q jack that we're going to be using. The jacks come with a retaining nut, and we're going to want to, the first thing you're going to do is take the retaining nut and put it onto the extension cable. You want to do this before you put it into the case. I'll slide this through. I'm going to start at the bottom row. I found that it's easier to tighten after you're done. If you start at the top, then it gets in the way of a wrench or pliers or whatever you're going to use to tighten up. So start on the very bottom row. Next, what I'm going to do to make this easier to solder is I typically, let me zoom in on this so you can see it better. These two leads are a little bit small. What I'm going to want to do is I'm going to use my wire strippers to strip away just a little bit more, about twice what's already there. So what we're going to do is on these individual ports, there's a little hole, and we're going to stick the wire through it and fold it on top of itself, or back on itself, and then we're going to solder it in place. These have a tinned edge on them, and so number one, you can't fold it, and number two, it seems to be a little bit short. If you're really good at soldering, then you can just mount it on there, put it directly onto the tip and solder it and move on. But I need a little extra help because I'm not really great at soldering. Okay, so I'm going to do one at a time. There's good. Next, what I want to do is I'm going to slide on the large heat shrink and slide it all the way back, and then I'm going to put the small piece onto the power, or the red wire, as such. Next, what I want to do, I'll try and get this where you can see it. There are two posts on it. The short one is your negative, or the black wire. The long one is your red, or the positive. Usually what I do is I start with the one that is closest to the back, so that it's easier to get to once you start soldering. what I'm going to try and do, let's see if I can focus on it. So I'm going to fold this and make a little L or a hook. And then I'm going to, let's see, this goes a small one. There. And then I'm going to fold it back on itself like that. All right. Oops. Okay. So now I'm going to take my soldering iron, and this one is pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to melt some solder onto the tip. This makes it easier for me to solder, and I'm going to get enough to where it loads it up. There we go. And then I'm just going to place it onto 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I put it on there for about 5 seconds, and that gives it enough time for it to heat up the nickel lug and for the solder to flow around it. And you can see on the other side it started to soak through the little hole, and it's holding it really tight. You can get it with a test tug, make sure it feels solid. Now I want to warn you, when you start working on these, if you put too much heat into this lug, it's going to traverse up into the jack, and then it's going to start melting the plastic and dislodge. I've had several problems on these, especially on the positive lug for some reason. You can see on this one, after I put too much heat on it, the center lug is actually missing. It moved inside of the jack. So about 5 seconds on my soldering iron is all it took. Test this on yours to see what it's going to take for it to adhere and make good contact. Next, I'm going to go ahead, my heat shrink tubing came off. I'm going to go ahead and put that back on. Make sure this is on there, or you'll end up having to use electrical tape or something like that. And then we'll go ahead and, just like before, I'm going to bend this a little bit to make a little L. I'm going to stick it through the little hole. Fold it back on itself. And then we'll repeat the process. Next, we're going to take the big heat and shrink tubing, and we're going to slide it over both. Just like before, just use a match or a lighter and just give it a little heat. It doesn't have to shrink down completely, but just enough to stay. There you go. And that's ready to go. Next, we're going to slide the jack back into the case. And then on the inside, you'll take the retaining nut. Let's see. You can see that there. You'll take the retaining nut and you'll just screw it on. If you want to secure this nicely, this is an 11mm wrench, and I just do a final tightening with that just to make sure it's good and stable. There you go. Now repeat the process for each one, and then we'll come back and then we'll test each one, each port, to make sure that all the connections are good.